Welcome back, students. This is module 1.3.3, and we're going to call it Trophic Relationships. You can see that the heading of the slide says energy and matter flow through ecosystems, and this occurs by who eats whom, and that is known as trophic relationships. So there we go. Ecosystems are in fact organized by trophic relationships, by who eats whom. So it's a matter of great importance to ecologists. A fundamental definition within this topic is food chain. A food chain is a simplified linear representation of trophic relationships. And this determines how energy and matter moves from one organism to another through ecosystems. An example of a simplified food chain would be an insect that eats grass that is eaten by a small bird that is eaten by a larger predatory bird, a hawk. So that's a simplified food chain. At this point, we're going to have you make some drawings. So you need to go to the space in your notes that's just beyond biomagnification. There's a blank spot there, and that's what we'd like you to do. I'm going to turn to the next slide, and I'm going to make the same drawings. So to draw this, let's see, I'm going to have to turn on my pen. There we go. And over at the very left, we're going to have something we're going to call terms. And then we're going to draw two pyramids off to the right, something like this. You got to squish them to fit them in. Each pyramid is going to be divided into fifths. So there's going to be 5 trophic levels in our pyramids. And we will have 5 rows of terms associated with them. We're going to consider this an aquatic food chain. And there at the bottom of the aquatic food chain, typically we have algae. Algae are little one-celled photosynthetic creatures. And for terminology, these are going to be the first trophic level. These are going to be our producers. So that's the terms that you should have written over there. And algae in our simplified aquatic food chain might be eaten by small crustaceans. Now there's many different types. There could be things like water fleas, but we're going to put something like copepods. Copepods are small relatives. They're not one-celled, and they are barely on the edge of being macroscopic. You can see them with your naked eye, but they are small little relatives of like crayfish and shrimp. And so this is the second trophic level. Remember, trophic means feeding. And these are, of course, what we call primary consumers, because these are the first consumers. And because they're the primary consumers, are eating the producers, which are typically plants. Therefore, primary consumers are often called herbivores. Herbivores. The third level on our simplified aquatic food chain might be a small fish, minnows. We won't specify the species, but some kind of minnow. And this would, of course, be the third trophic level. It would be the secondary consumer. And since the minnows are eating the flesh of other creatures, they're in fact carnivores, so these would be primary carnivores. That's a lot of labeling there. Primary carnivores. Minnows in turn might be eaten by a larger predatory fish. We're going to say a largemouth bass. And to save some writing, I'm just going to put LM bass. So a largemouth bass. Of course, this would be the 4th trophic level. This would be the tertiary or third level consumer. And this would be a secondary carnivore. Secondary carnivore. Oops. Carnivores. And finally, at the top, we might have some apex predator, something like an osprey. If you know what an osprey is, it's a large hawk that eats fish. And so this would be the 5th trophic level. It would be a quaternary consumer, 4th layer consumer, 4th level consumer. Quaternary consumer. And it would be a tertiary carnivore, but we're going to call it a top carnivore. Nothing makes a living eating ospreys. We'll talk about why that is. Carnivores. Okay, so there's our terms, and this is our pyramid. This would be a pyramid of numbers. Now, it's not accurate in its proportions, but pyramid of numbers. What it shows is that the base down here where the algae are is wider than where the copepods and etc. on up. Gets narrower toward the top, signifying that it takes many algae to support one copepod, many copepods to support one minnow, many minnows to support one bass, many bass to support one osprey. And so you get a decreasing population at each of the trophic levels, where top predators are quite rare. Now, we want to label the pyramid over at the very right as well. This is known as a pyramid of energy. Pyramid of energy. And the numbers I'm going to put in here are approximate, somewhat hypothetical, we could say. But I'm going to label it, we're going to just put over here one, I'm going to start at the first trophic level with 1,000 energy units. Now, EUs could be any number of different energy units. Could be ergs or British thermal units or whatever. Calories. It doesn't matter because what we really want to show here is that, in fact, as we move from one trophic level to the next, that approximately 90% of the energy becomes unavailable to the next trophic level. So as we go from the first trophic level to the second, we can see that there are only 100 energy units available, available to the copepods, where there were 1,000 for the algae. And if we go on up to the minnows, there's 10 EUs. And if we go up to the largemouth bass, there's 1 EU. And if we go up to the osprey, there's 1/10 of an energy unit. And this is a very important fact that explains a lot about what we see in real food chains, in real ecosystems. As a matter of fact, we're going to come back to this drawing a little bit later, and let's just see, when we go to the next slide, talking about different feeding levels. This is really the terminology that was over on the left of your drawing. Here is an example of a simplified food chain showing trophic relationships. This shows a five-level food chain. Now, in point of fact, we in defining food chains, we say that they are simplified. And that's because the reality is that food chains really don't exist in this simplified way. What exists in ecosystems are food webs, and because energy and matter has a different flow, all organisms do not simply eat one type of food. And the greater the diversity of a food web, the greater its stability. There are many avenues for food, energy, and matter to go through. If one avenue becomes lost, if one species is not present, the whole food chain doesn't collapse, the whole food web doesn't collapse. there are alternative ways for matter and energy to flow. Here's another example of a food web, and I really like this next one I'm going to show you. There you go. This is a simplified food web for the Northwest Atlantic. You notice that it's in the rectangles out here in the center where you see many of the species. Those are many different species of fishes that are found out there. Now, it turns out that there are energy constraints on ecosystems. And notice the difference between energy and matter. Energy has a one-way flow through ecosystems and is not recycled. So however much energy you start with, it goes down, and 90% approximately is lost at each trophic level, leaving only 10%. What happens to the 90% that's lost is it's dissipated as unconcentrated energy, as heat. Feel your face, it's warm right now. That energy that's coming off of you is not able to do useful work. And so that's what we mean when we say low energy, or low density energy. Every trophic level has some mass, and that does contain energy. And as I said, at each successive trophic level, 90% of the energy is lost and unavailable to the next. Now, this is an important point that you should be able to explain in some detail, and that is that food chains are of limited length, and they support relatively few top predators because of energy limitations. If you get up in the morning and go outside and you see grass growing there, you don't get all excited and jump up and down and go, look, it's grass, it's grass. But if on the other hand you go out there and there's a jaguar or a mountain lion or a bald eagle or a peregrine falcon, you'll get pretty excited and go, wow. That's because those top predators are rare, while the producers at the base of the food chain are very common. And one of the best ecological explanations for this fact is this, what I call the trophic rule. It's not really called that in ecology, but Charters calls it the trophic rule, where 90% of the energy is lost. And so as you go up the food chain, there's less and less energy, and therefore there's fewer and fewer organisms. And top predators are on the knife's edge of survival. They're very good indicators of ecosystem health, because in order for the top predators to be present in a healthy population, then it means that all of the trophic levels beneath them that support them are also intact, healthy, and functioning as they should be. An interesting point is that humans, of course, feed at the top of the food chain, and that there are some concerns with people. There's about 1 in 6 people, that's over 1 billion people, go to bed hungry each night without enough food. And the Earth could support more people if we ate at lower trophic levels. Now, there are socio-political factors with poor food distribution that explain some of that, but just from a production viewpoint, we could produce more food if humans ate at lower trophic levels. Let me show you what I mean. This figure shows over here on the left, it shows 100 kilocalories in grain. And of course, when a cow eats it can only get 10 kilocalories. And so if a human eats a steak, it only gets 1 kilocalorie. Now, notice that's only 1 kilocalorie going to humans. If instead humans directly ate the grain, they fed as herbivores rather than as carnivores, you could get 10 kilocalories to feed people instead of only 1. So you could support more humans by feeding at a different trophic level. Now, very importantly, I've already said that energy has this one-way flow through ecosystems and is eventually dissipated as heat that is not useful, can't do useful work, and is not reused. This is unlike matter. Matter are the atoms of elements, carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus, other things like that flow through ecosystems, and matter is recycled by decomposers for reuse. So energy and matter have very different fates going through different trophic levels and you need to be able to understand and explain this. Related to this idea of matter being recycled is the concept of biogeochemical cycles. Now, that is a great word to use an etymological approach upon, biogeochemical cycles. Bio means life, geo means earth, and chemical means chemical. Okay, so biogeochemical cycles are cycles that take a particular element, say, for example, nitrogen, and it follows it through living things, it follows it through the earth. And so it traces how matter is recycled through ecosystems. There exists a carbon cycle, a nitrogen cycle, a hydrological cycle, a phosphorus cycle, and many others in addition to these cycles. We have one last topic that we want to address before we end this module, and that is the topic of biomagnification. Biomagnification is defined as the increased accumulation and concentration of a harmful substance at each successive trophic level. And the reason that biological magnification, or simply biomagnification, occurs is because the functioning bodies of living organisms, that is the physiology of an organism, makes a mistake. It mistakes the harmful substance for something that is needed. And often these substances that are mistakenly accumulated are either fat soluble or they are heavy metals. And in order to illustrate this point, I think we ought to go back to our drawing with the pyramid. So I'm going to go back here. It'll look kind of funny to you, but we'll get back to these drawings. Here we are. And I want you to draw a third pyramid here. And the shape doesn't look conducive to a regular pyramid, and that's okay, because we're not going to draw a regular pyramid. We're going to draw an inverted pyramid of biological magnification. So go ahead and draw a pyramid that's upside down, like this. It fits in there. And we're going to make our same 5 trophic levels. Whoops. Just like that. And what we're going to put in there, I guess I'll label it as inverted pyramid of biomagnification. And we're going to use DDT. That's an organophosphate pesticide. It was widely used to discover, it's an artificial chemical that doesn't exist in nature. A human being discovered it and won the Nobel Prize for chemistry. It supplied a weapon in our war with insects. On this earth, there are 3 species that are fighting for dominance. Those 3 groups, I should say, not species. Though humans are one group and one species. The others are the insects, and then, of course, the microbes, the bacteria. And, of course, insecticides gave us a weapon to fight the insects. But what we found is that because of this accumulation, that it led to some bad consequences. DDT was sprayed everywhere. You could see children running down the streets behind trucks, and it was spraying out, and kids would be in it. And it wasn't believed to be very harmful to people. And directly, it doesn't seem to be that harmful to people, but indirectly is where the harm lies. It hurts the ecosystems upon which all living things, including humans, depend. I remember reading an account, and I want to say this is in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. This was an account of some ornithologists that were going to go look at a pelican colony off the coast of Southern California on the Channel Islands. This was an island one of these islands was uninhabited by humans, and that's where the colony was. And the researcher, I remember, wrote, it couldn't imagine a more perfect setting, a more perfect place for pelicans to nest. And when they got there to the place, to the colony, they got out and they started examining nests, and they became very alarmed because there were no chicks. What had happened was that DDT and one of its metabolic breakdown products caused the shells of the eggs that the female pelicans laid to be very thin. And as a consequence, when the mother sat upon the eggs to incubate them, they cracked. And so this perfect setting, almost an idyllic setting, and there was no reproduction. This was a chilling thing, and I remember reading this and the hair on the back of my neck standing up. And it was about such occurrences that Rachel Carson wrote the very famous book called Silent Spring. And that was because the spring would be silent because of DDT causing all the birds' populations to plummet because they could no longer reproduce. Anyway, let's write in some of the numbers here. And this is where I'm really making up the numbers. But it's something like this. There's a figure in there. So this is 0.0001 ppm. And you may or may not know ppm stands for parts per million. ppm DDT. So, and out in the environment, in the water, the DDT levels would be even lower, but they are biomagnified by the algae. And each copepod has to eat many algae to survive, and as it does so, it gets the full load of DDT. And so if we look at the DDT level at the copepods, it has increased. It has been biomagnified, 0.03. And then if we look at the minnows, it's gotten even greater, 0.71. And this is again ppm DDT. And if we look up at the largemouth bass, it's gotten even bigger. It may be something like 3.4 parts per million. And when we get up to the ospreys, it can be 25 parts per million or higher. And that's the level at which avian reproduction, bird reproduction, it can be affected. And if we go back, we can look at some real numbers rather than my made-up numbers. So if we look here, of course, I noted it is most harmful to the top carnivore, the effect of DDT on pelicans or other things. Here's some DDT residues from an estuary in New York. I'm not going to belabor the point. Here's some numbers from a food chain, something like the one we're showing. My numbers aren't too far off. They're a little off, but you get the idea, though, I hope. I would also like to point out before we close this last module that other things can be biologically magnified. For example, in Japan, there was a fishing village called Minamata. And Minamata, Japan, was the site of a environmental tragedy in which a corporation put a plant there, and it started putting the effluent into Minamata Bay, where these fishermen had fished for centuries and centuries, say literally thousands of years. There had been a fishing village there. And in the pollution, which was in the effluent, was mercury. And mercury was biologically magnified in this process, and it went up the food chain. And they started to notice things like some of the seabirds, especially the ones that the fishermen, when they cleaned their fish, they threw the guts to these birds, and the birds started flying funny and flying into the ground, and cats started walking in circles because the cats ate this too. And then it started to affect people, and this became known as Minamata disease, this mercury poisoning caused by biological magnification. And again, it was one of the great tragedies in which this was brought to light, that this is not something that has no effect on humans, that we are in fact connected. In any case, this concludes this module, and we'll continue later.